All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, Thank you so much for joining. My name is Rachel Reese. I'm CF Leads' Communications and Digital Marketing Manager. And we're so pleased to be partnering and presenting with the Community Foundation, the Greater Cincinnati Community Foundation today. We have a wonderful program with incredible speakers, and we're going to be discussing how to power change through data-driven initiatives. But before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So because this is a webinar format, you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to join us by phone using the number on the screen and the webinar ID. And then lastly, this webinar is being recorded and we'll be posting it on our website and YouTube channel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Leonard Brock, who's CF Leads' Vice President for Learning and Impact.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for joining the second webinar in the new CF Leads Economic Mobility webinar series. This webinar series features community foundations and partners working to advance economic mobility in their communities. Economic mobility, in many references, is the most important issue of the 21st century. How we define economic mobility may vary from community to community, but the ultimate goal/aim is always to strengthen the economic vitality of individuals and families throughout the world. This requires a multi-pronged approach which consists of several component parts, like addressing racial inequity, gender inequity, sustainability, and ensuring there are unintended consequences in their future harm. In this second webinar, the Greater Cincinnati Foundation will share how they use data to determine the target population for their grant making and how to best measure community impact. The foundation will also discuss how to work with board members in understanding systems level outcomes. Joining me today, I am pleased to have the following communities for champions for change. Megan Cummings, Vice President, Civic Advancement for Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Rashida Cromwell, Vice President, Community Strategies for Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Denisha Porter, Executive Director, All In Cincinnati, and Senior Advisor to the CEO for Greater Cincinnati Foundation. And Ann Switzer, former Greater Cincinnati Foundation Board Member and Procter & Gamble Senior Executive. At this time, I would like to turn it over to the Greater Cincinnati Foundation to learn more about their work to strengthen economic mobility. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Leonard. We are just delighted to be with all of you today to share a little bit about our journey and what we're still learning in this work on economic mobility and how we use data to inform our decisions and kind of set a path forward. We've been so honored to do this work along with so many other folks in the country that we met through the EMON cohort with Leonard and his team at CF Leads. So everything we've learned has also have pieces of everyone else's wisdom in it. So this has been a journey we've been on and certainly are looking forward to sharing what we've learned and learning more from all of you throughout this journey. It's really important and it constantly evolves. So I thought I would kick us off today with just kind of how we settled on some of the data that inform this strategy. First, I'll give you just a really quick overview of kind of how our foundation fits into this. So we are a Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and we were founded in 1963. We just celebrated our 60th anniversary. We have a staff of about 60 and assets of nearly $1 billion. And our mission is to create a Greater Cincinnati that is vibrant and equitable. And, you know, in the history of the foundation, perhaps like many of your foundations, we were across many areas of focus, probably 6 or 7 areas of focus. And we really went a mile wide and an inch deep. And when our former CEO came on board, you know, we really thought, what is the fight of our generation right now? And we really talked a lot about racial equity and how we could make a mark on racial equity being the biggest, most powerful lever we could pull in our region to make a vibrant and equitable area for everyone to learn and work and grow and play in our area. So our deep concentrated investments came out of that racial equity focus, and they're in economic mobility, affordable housing, and racial justice. So you can imagine how important it was during the Iman cohort that we really dug deep on economic mobility and how our community foundation could make meaningful change in that area for our region. One of the things that was kind of like an early indicator on the data front for us was our Women's Fund, which is embedded in our community foundation, worked with our local Chamber of Commerce. They do these economic outlook reports about every 10 years. You might be familiar with them in your area. And they really project what job growth will look like in our MSA. Do we have the right people to fill those jobs? What are the wages of those jobs? How can we kind of measure what that vibrancy is going to be from these economic outlooks? Since our Women's Fund was involved, we really pushed our chamber to include a racial and gender lens on this data, which had never been done before and was just such a key indicator that showed that we can look at averages as far as how jobs are going to grow and what the wages of those jobs. But until you apply that racial and gender lens to that information, you really don't see how individual groups are faring within our region. So we did exactly that. When they applied the racial and gender lens to this economic outlook, we saw some really powerful information. The median annual earnings in 2018, again, this kind of predates our Iman cohort group, was $37,000 across all of our jobs. But you can see specifically when we look at race and gender on that, both of those groups are so much lower. Cincinnati is generally a very Black and white town. There's not a large percentage of other minority groups. So a lot of our data you'll see as Black and white in this study. African-American female workers were earning $24,100, 36% lower than the median annual earnings across all workers in our MSA. And as we started to interrogate this information and just be deeply uncomfortable about these disparities in our community and what they meant for our community vibrancy, our Women's Fund decided to take this even a step forward, to say we really need to do a study that really specifically looks at Black women in our MSA and what are the barriers they're facing, what are the tailwinds and headwinds to progress for them. Based on that, our Women's Fund launched into a three-part series of Black women's economic mobility. One was a historical look, like how did we get here in the first place? Why is there so much segregation based on race and gender in our labor market? And that has roots in slavery through Jim Crow to present, about who was allowed in different jobs at different points in US history. So there's a historical piece to that. And then we did a quantitative view. And the biggest piece of data that just kind of shook us all on this was in our MSA of employed Black women, 49% of employed Black women in our MSA are making less than $15 an hour, which at full-time rates is about $30,000 a year, which is well below the self-sufficiency standard for our area. And I would guess well below the self-sufficiency standard for anyone on this call today, no matter what geography you're coming from. And when we on this chart, you can see it broken out by all women, all men, Black women, Black men, white women, white men. And the disparity is just really haunting for us. So we knew as a group that this data led us to say, if we don't make a measurable impact in the lives and the economic outlook of Black women, our efforts are futile here. So we really embrace this targeted universalism idea to say we want to see the whole region thrive. And Black women have to be thriving for any of that to be true. So this was kind of our first piece where we really thought the data has led us to focus on a very specific group as we pursue this work, and then really understand where Black women are in our economy, what occupational groups, and then we could kind of triangulate down to like what sectors do we need to start on to make a difference in our area. I'm going to turn it over to Rashida, who's going to tell the next part of our story.
Yeah, so thank you, Megan. The groundwork that Megan just named, really looking at the data, really diving into deep of what minorities, what groups are having this disparities. Disaggregating that data kind of led and informed our groundwork for our strategy moving forward. And when we talk about our strategy and we talk about how to operationalize this data, I think so often we can get stuck in making data the center of what we're doing and not realizing we're trying to make data-informed decisions. We're trying to make data-informed strategies. We're intending to make change in the community. So we truly use that data to inform our strategy, not just only with our grant making, but other tools and other levers we could pull on in the community for our community foundation. So we looked at the way that we were doing our grant making, how we're measuring impact, how are we convening partners, other tools including impact investing. Are we really diving into the root causes of these issues? And so we did have to do more, of course, research to understand the why. We did assemble focus groups. We really spoke to people who are directly impacted by these issues, so particularly Black women and other women of color. We talked to about the challenges they face in the workplace, the challenges they face in economic mobility, and then how, as a community foundation, can we lean forward with those issues in mind, hearing from them directly, knowing how to move forward. And we really kind of landed on some big areas for our work, specifically looking at workplace culture, how workplace is set up, systems change work. We really also dove into family income and wealth building as a big challenge, including credit counseling, also talking through wraparound and thinking about the challenges in the workplace, not in terms of just the workplace, but childcare issues often were named. Transportation often came up as a big issue. So we continue to take layers and layers deeper into the data, not just for data sake or research sake, but I really am trying to overemphasize here, this data is how we wanted to move forward in making our decisions about our investments and decisions about the way we did our work. And then we truly tried to make a step forward in what we thought was a very bold or trailblazing sort of way, accountable to make sure the things that we are saying are important and that the data we have, we're actually holding ourselves accountable to making progress in that work, in those particular areas. So Megan, if you don't mind sharing screen. So we really start to look at where our investments are going in economic mobility. This was sort of, and while we've boiled it down to this very simplistic slide, I have to say this was quite a bit of work to look across all the organizations that we are investing in, all that we were supporting, also bring in a trust-based philanthropy lens, right? So we didn't want to dictate the outcomes that we were looking for. We wanted to lean in and listen to our organizations and listen to our grantees. Or where are some of the common areas where we're diving deep and making a difference in the very areas that our community has expressed and the folks who are being impacted by these issues have said are important to them. So again, always using that data lens. And when we looked at our investments, we realized first and foremost, we couldn't do it in a one-year snapshot. So I just wanted to call out that expecting organizations to make tremendous and deep impact across 1 year, we just knew was unrealistic for some issues that Megan even pointed out have existed in our regions historically. Right, so we decided what we were going to do is sort of look at our work in terms of a portfolio and sort of a 5-year snapshot. And we said we truly had to name, if we're seeing from the data that Black women are facing the largest disparities in economic mobility and earnings, then we need to hold our strategic aim to increase the median annual earnings of Black women and be okay with sort of diving in deep in that particular goal, knowing that we're identifying our most vulnerable population. We see the data in that most vulnerable population, and we want to hold ourselves accountable to moving that needle. So that was sort of our big, hairy, audacious goal, if you will, our strategic aim. And we looked at where and how many investments, what are the people we're impacting, and how many dollars are we really awarding in that area? So that was our kind of first snapshot. So you see here at GCF, the number of grants, the number of organizations, the people impact, and the number of grants awarded. We felt like this is pretty traditional. I'm sure many other funders and foundations are also doing the same work. And that's when we decided to really lean in, what are the outcomes from that work? Are individuals really receiving the job coaching that they're asking for? Are we really saving and creating quality jobs? And I can get into a whole rabbit hole about what's quality jobs, but are individuals reporting increased income levels? Essentially, if we're trying to move the needle, we have to see if the work we're doing, the programs that we're supporting are helping people earn more. Financial assistance, are people being supported with financial assistance? And something else that came from our data was minority-owned businesses facing huge hurdles and challenges in accessing capital, particularly Black women. So how are we helping minority-owned businesses grow and scale and access not only the dollars that they need, but other technical assistance and capacity support? And then we looked at the companies. So we know this is not going to be done with the not-for-profit sector alone. We're hearing the data and we're listening to our folks and saying that it's not just companies, it's not just individuals. Our companies and our workplaces have work to do as well. So we want to make sure that we leaned into the business sector and really thought of this as a multi-sector approach. So we're really kind of proud. This is sort of the early phases, if you will, of where our organization is going and measuring data and how we're holding ourselves accountable to that data and really seeing, are we indeed moving the needle? We have the data and the research that identifies the problems. We see the problems, and are we moving the needle along in those problems? So this is just a way we've used sort of the research to do that. We also want to acknowledge that we need to lean in and do some systems change and deep policy work. We took both a micro and macro approach, an analogy that we got from the Racial Equity Institute called Fish, Lake, and Groundwater. Maybe you'll hear a little bit more about that later, but we really wanted to make sure that we're not just kind of solving the fish, right? We're also looking at what are the systems in place that have led to these inequities and how can we make a difference in that? So we've made some true progress even in the investments and how we think about philanthropy. And so I just want to call out a few quick examples here. One of the biggest examples in a way that we've really led in thought leadership, and it's not quite up here, but I want to call it out, is investing in an organization. Their name is Family Independent Initiative, FII, or excuse me, they've changed their name. Up Together is the name of them now, but really leaning into an organization that's changed the way financial assistance looks. So often we think low-income individuals or low-income earners, there's something wrong with them, right? They need to be fixed in some type of way. And Up Together truly took a different approach and said, nothing's wrong with low-income individuals except where they lack access to resources. They are low income because of the absence of actually the dollars. So what does providing direct financial support to those individuals and those families look like, and giving them the autonomy to make their own decisions, set their own goals, do their own family planning without a program dictating what they should be doing. And we've seen tremendous success, and we've leaned a lot into their data too to tell us what happens when families are empowered to do what's best and what's needed for themselves. And we've kind of grown and scaled and worked closely with this organization to hopefully make this really, really a larger initiative across our region. And so I just want to name that as one of the examples. We've also done some work around our advocacy efforts, knowing that we're seeing that low-income earners disproportionately are Black women. How can we increase the median or average wage as we look at the median of actually what we're trying to push and increase? So we have been very excited, not just of the grantees that we're supporting, but also the thought leadership and advocacy that we've done around that work. And I don't want to steal too much of Denisha's thunder, so I don't know if I should stop there, because one of the things that we have been very proud to actually support is leaning into those who, again, are directly impacted by this initiative. So we've supported All in Cincinnati. In many ways, they're very much a part of Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and actually listening to the voices of those Black women who are every day going through these challenges.
Thank you so much, Rashida, and I'll take it from there. All in Cincinnati is a racial equity coalition, and we work to dismantle racial inequities in our 5 priority areas of health, housing, education, economic mobility, and justice, with the goal to uplift and advance Black women in Hamilton County. We do all of our work through 3 pillars. So that's truth, racial healing, and transformation. Truth, telling the truth about racial equity from the perspective of Black women in Hamilton County. racial healing, really bringing people together to have the open, honest, and bold conversations about race and systemic racism and transformation, really creating those policy and system changes in collaboration with policymakers, including county commissioners, the mayor, and city council members. And I'm so happy about the All In Cincinnati Coalition. We really have come together as a community, working with policymakers to make a lot of huge changes. And we've done all of that work with a dedicated core team. So we have about 20 members who are on our core team, and they have expertise in all of our priority areas of health, housing, education, economic mobility, and justice. But they are also the leaders, the gurus, the people who have been making changes for decades in Hamilton County on our core team. So for them, it's super personal, and they're passionate about the work that they do. And then we also have an 150 plus coalition that is comprised of people from governmental agencies, the business community, educational institutions, healthcare institutions, and public health, who all come to the table for a 2-hour meeting. So the first part of the meeting is the business meeting, and we always educate on policy and advocacy, or one of those priority areas. And then the second part of the meeting, we really dig deep and take a deep dive into strategy around whatever policy or system change that we're trying to make. I started in 2019, and I came from the public health field. Prior to that, I was the director of health promotion. So I have worked using the social determinants of health model to really create and mobilize community members, and created over 400 location-specific policy and systems changes in Cincinnati with 50 community members. And so now we've tripled that with All In Cincinnati. And the whole goal is to really listen to the community. As Megan and Rashida said, it's all about people leading the charge with the lived experience. So we collectively created our vision to make Hamilton County more equitable together. We decided that we wanted to streamline and focus down on Black women, because Black women were the most impacted in Hamilton County. As Megan said, around 50% of Black women in our MSA make $15 or below, and that's only $30,000 a year. Additionally, in the All In Cincinnati report, it was highlighted that we can bring in over $10 billion more to the region if we close these racial disparities. And so with that, those two pieces of data, people came together and mobilized. And we were able to even get judges involved in some of our work. So an example of something that's new and novel that we've created here in Hamilton County is that we're placing community health workers within the justice system. So Judge Trotter Bratton and Judge Wendy Cross have placed community health workers to help people and meet them right where they are, to connect them with services. And this has been proven to decrease rates of recidivism around people going back to jail. And so this is huge. We're looking to expand this model statewide and hopefully federally. And I will say there has been this real culture change. So originally with the All In Cincinnati report that we created, our All In strategic plan, which we've accomplished over 80% of our strategic plan in 4 years, and it's a 5-year strategic plan. At first, we were reaching out to city council members and to the mayor and the county commissioners to talk to them about our policy recommendations. What has shifted? They are now reaching out to us, to the coalition, coming to us, telling us these are policy changes that we're looking to implement. What are your thoughts about it? What does your core team think about it? What does the coalition agree with? Or what can the coalition make better? So I lifted the transformation pillar in 2020 and 2021. We delved deeper into racial healing, and we started Cincinnati's National Day of Racial Healing, where over 1,500 people attended that first event, and we've had over 3,500 people attend the event since then. And we spotlighted local leaders, and we wanted to bring them to the forefront, highlighting their use of the racial healing model as they made policy and systems change and advocated for different things in their community. that was super important to us. We wanted to make sure that we let people know that Cincinnati was transformative, was innovative, and could do a lot of different things. And then finally, we lifted our truth pillar just last year, and we placed racial equity, honor, celebrating, and loving Black women everywhere in Cincinnati. We have an ad in the Cincinnati airport. We've put it on billboards. We have been in all the magazines. We've been in Venue magazines. We've been in the Herald. And then we also have commercials that are on Channel 12 that talk about the importance of celebrating Black women, really talking about changing the narrative. And then we've done a docuseries that will be featured at our, what is it called? Our railroad center. And so we have done tremendous work, and it's all from the community. And most recently, we launched our economic mobility series. And we really wanted to do that because a lot of Black women wanted to start businesses. They had a lot of side hustles, but they didn't have the resources or the tools to formalize them and make them an actual business. So we started that. We got local leaders involved to help give them the resources, help them build a business plan, help them deal with the anxiety and the stress of creating their own businesses. And now, because of the success with our economic mobility cohort, Channel 12 and the Bengals have come together and said, we want to highlight those Black women-owned businesses. So every week during the Bengals Nation event, we highlight a Black woman-owned business, and she gets to promote her business, talk about the items that she's selling, and then they get to make connections with not only people who are in the audience, but with the Bengals and Channel 12 as well. So those are some things that I've highlighted with All in Cincinnati, but it's been a wonderful journey. And I believe that the power always lies in the people, and that's what has shown with All in Cincinnati. The people have been at the forefront, and the people have made the change. And so I'll transition over to Ann to talk about data from our board perspective.
Thanks, Denisha. And that's the perfect setup, because the role of the board is really asking good questions and empowering this amazing staff that you've seen, and then the community that Denisha has pulled together to really make the change happen. So our role in the board and the process has really been asking questions to help the staff really crystallize first the journey to equity, and then choosing economic mobility. And it's worth noting before that that the board chair and the CEO were very focused on making sure they had a board that was representative of the community. So we do have a very diverse board that helps. But as we moved on this journey, the first thing the board did was really go deep via the Racial Equity Institute that Rashida mentioned, and Racial Equity Matters training. And you will hear everywhere around GCF and in the board, is it groundwater, lake, or fish is what we talk about, which groundwater is really the systems change. Lake is somewhere in between. Fish is helping the individual people. And that concept really got us focused on what are the very few things we should choose as the groundwater to really drive the changes we need. And Rashida talked about Up Together. That's one of the choices. So lots of time educating ourselves, then lots of questions working with staff to get really clear on the strategy. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited resources. So as we went to catalyze this in our grant making and our impact investing, where were the areas we really wanted to focus, which Rashida showed that to you. So thinking about that, then a lot of time spent talking about measures. And as you can guess, there are people on the board who would love to directly correlate the results, and that's not always possible. And we worked on what are the big measures we're going for, how we'll look at that. Rashida showed that to you. And then we also talked about trust-based philanthropy and how we partner with our funders to get there. So a lot of work was done on that. And then we also, in our community strategies team, instituted an annual review of the economic mobility strategy, where we can look back and bring in some of the people who's being funded and have a community dialogue about what's working, what's not, and where do we go and how do we keep driving, I love your word, these BHAGs, these big, hairy, audacious goals, how we work to do that. So I think we really asked questions and sort of pushed the staff to take it further, would be the role of the board. But I couldn't be more proud of the GCF team and what they've done to take the data behind economic mobility, catalyze it in the community, especially with All In, and then really also advocate for changes. So with that, maybe back to you, Leonard, for some questions.
Yes, yes, this was absolutely powerful. Thank you for the wonderful work you're doing to drive economic mobility in your community. I do have a good number of questions in response to what you shared. And I'll start with asking one question now is, can you share any lessons learned or challenges faced while using data to drive systems change? I know systems change came up multiple times throughout your presentation. So can you share more about the lessons learned or the challenges faced while using data to drive systems change and also inform programming?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that one first. We're learning a lot. There's a lot of lessons learned, and I think one thing that I guess we would have been more aware of, and we're course correcting for it now, is that our staff and our board got so immersed in the data and what group we were trying to drive results from, and that also permeated through all of our marketing throughout the foundation. And as we talked about our mission and what we were doing, we always talked about Black women. And I'm not saying for a minute that wasn't important to talk about. But I think what we're seeing now is that perhaps some people in our community, when they heard that singular focus on Black women and their economic mobility, perhaps they didn't see themselves in the work of the foundation anymore. And so I think one lesson learned is, as we can be very, very focused on one population, how do we also use language around that that doesn't minimize that work? I'm not saying that, but that calls everyone in to the benefit of them being involved in this movement, even though internally we are very focused on the outcomes of one group as a targeted universalism concept. So I think that's, you know, a challenge that we face that we're still working through, but perhaps we could have been more savvy on the messaging, making sure everyone in our community knew this was a fight that would benefit everyone and the vibrancy of our whole community while still centering Black women. So that's one thing I would say on that part. Rashida, did you have more to add on that one?
No, I think you named that exactly right, Megan. I don't have anything particularly add on that. I would say systems change work you're to measuring.
Oh, there we go. You're good.
Okay. Sometimes when we've thought about how to measure and how to use data to make decisions, we want sort of that instant gratification, for lack of better words. You have to really, really understand that systems change work takes time. These systems have been in existence from the very start. And in some ways, they are performing exactly as they were set up to do, right? And so really making pivots in those systems, really seeing equitable communities, justice happens is not going to be sort of an instant data point that you have to collect. It's going to require looking beyond the numbers, talking to multiple groups, listening to multiple voices, as well as paying attention to what's happening in your political landscape. That's another way to think about systems change. So I think it is a sort of challenge in data and thinking outside the box, and maybe some traditional data collection efforts.
Rashida, I'm so glad you lifted that up. You know, a lot of our work is untangling this legacy of slavery that is present in our history, right? And addressing the disparities created from that. So we're looking back to 1619, right? If you think about in quarters, that is 1,616 quarters, okay? Since slavery started in the US. When you have a board or a lot of corporate folks that are looking to see results in 2 quarters or 3 quarters or 4 quarters or 8 quarters, I mean, it's just incredible, like when we're trying to untangle this very, very complicated history and be intentional about equitable policies moving forward, we are undoing more than 1,000 quarters of that, right? So I think to Anne's point, and why it's great to have board members like Anne, she understands that progress takes time. And this is really, really difficult work to untangle this. And we are going to see some measurable outcomes in a couple of quarters, but this is the work of our generation. I think that our hope, I think for everyone on this call, is that these results that we hope we're working toward right now will far outlive us and, continue to make progress, even though, maybe we're no longer in the field at that time.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Systems change certainly requires time. And I heard from you, Denisha, and others that you work across sectors. And one of the questions I had in response to that is, how were you able to build the patience in your community as it relates to working across sectors and getting the various partners to understand that population level outcomes does not happen overnight. It takes time, it takes persistence and perseverance. How were you able to kind of get the community to row in the same direction and be patient with the process?
So I've been told that I'm a very patient person. And so I think that I blend that into the work. But I also think that I have a very optimistic outlook on things. And so I always say to the coalition that this is hard work, but it's not impossible work. And I believe that it's not impossible work because we all have a purpose, right? So if we all put our purpose into this work, we can all move this forward. And I also believe that just hearing people and allowing people to think outside the box makes a world of difference. And I always call people in. So when I first started the coalition, there were a lot of people who wanted to meet with me prior to the coalition meeting. And the only question they would ask would be like, so can I come to the coalition meeting? And I'm like, sure. It's open to every and any one. And I didn't even think about that. Like the culture is you have to meet first to then say that you are approved to be a part of this initiative. And that never ever dawned on me. I'm like, this coalition is open to anyone and anybody at any time. And you don't have to come to every meeting. Although we typically have about 75 people who join our monthly coalition meeting. And really, like I said, there's no wrong answer. Thinking outside of the box, being innovative is a part of the culture with the coalition, and just inviting those policy makers to be a part of our meetings too, so that the community members are hearing right up front from the policymakers what's happening in the community.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. The next question I wanted to ask you all, and you alluded to some of this already, but I wanted to ask the question again is, what strategies or tools do you use to communicate data insights effectively to different stakeholders, including community members or funders? I know you referenced that you include the population most impacted in the process. So I wanted to ask, what strategies or tools do you use to communicate data insights effectively to the various stakeholders that you work with?
Yeah. So we really believe that one of our superpowers, I like to call it, is convening and bringing folks together across multiple sectors. And we use those times when we convene partners to share the data that we have, and also allow some space and allow them to provide the data that they have as well, right? This is a collective effort. Not one single entity can do it on its own. So Anne a little bit spoke to this, to say that Greater Cincinnati Foundation or any foundation is making all the changes in its community is just unrealistic. So it's acknowledging that first and foremost. And we've done a lot of that in conversational settings, a lot of meetings. And I know, and that sounds painful, but it really has organically allowed us to hear the data that we might be missing out there, right? We do not know anything. No single organization or individual or group knows everything. So it's allowed us to glean additional insights from multiple groups. And then it's allowed us to share our learnings with them as well. So this has become a two-way street and a true partnership. And I think doing it through the convening and through authentic connectivity beyond before, I would say some of our more traditional, and I'm sure other funders on the call have used these same tools like a grant report, for example, or making a beautiful press release or posting the data on the website. We still do those things, to be clear, and we make beautiful reports, to be clear. But we thought beyond that, to truly allow the data not, again, just sit in data and not be used to inform what's actually happening in our community, required us to actually come together. And we call that our power of convening and actually engage in community conversations. And that's been powerful for us. And community conversations, again, are not-for-profit partners with the business community. I mean, multiple community conversations across multiple audiences, and then occasionally bringing all the different audiences together. It has to be conversational, and that's been our most effective way in communicating the data, because people can be in data overload, a little doubtful, right? We've hit this new era of even doubting the data. And we want people to know the rigor in which the data was collected. And we want to learn about what the data and what they're hearing from their constituents as well.
Rashida, maybe share a little bit about co-investing too and what we were able to do with Up Together.
Oh, absolutely. So another superpower, as Anne named, is our donors. Of course, we are a community foundation. We exist through the power of folks' generosity. So instead of kind of making decisions on our own or within our staff and within this bubble, we've shared some big community initiatives that we want to change. I mentioned it previously. Up Together was one of them. And instead of this just being through purely grant dollars or purely through the resources held at the community foundation, we invited donors to join along with us in this journey, to learn about the organization, hear more about the data that they have, what can be gained from pivoting to a different sort of financial well-being model. And as a result, maybe to no surprise, our donors really stepped up, leaned in, and provided co-investment, is what we call it, our organization, to make it one of the largest gifts in GCF history. And it was an incredible effort of almost $2 million. We couldn't have done that with our grant budget alone. Donors made that possible. So what we realized that inside of convening, actually engaging our donors are another superpower that we have, and not only for the purpose of asking, not to make it transactional, but inviting them to learn alongside with us and decide if this is something worthy of their investment as well.
Awesome, thank you.
I was wondering if I could add, Leonard, maybe something we've learned along the way, and just to be really vulnerable about this as far as sharing data. Especially when the Women's Fund came out with the Economic Mobility Series for Black women. And it was really, really tough personal research, right? There was a historical part, there was a quantitative part, and then there were qualitative parts, stories about people's lives. They sat down with 38 Black women, 2 hours each individual. It was just very, very rich. One thing that I reflect on is there is a really sincere responsibility when you share this information. And I think very vulnerably when we were sharing this information, especially in mixed race groups, it was really difficult. And I think one thing for folks who have no exposure to this data, do not know the disparities, do not know what this looks like in our community, part of you just wants to shake them and say, like, you have to see this. Do you see this? This is unacceptable in our community. And you really want to wake them up because they have the agency and the power to make different decisions. And you're just you just want to be so thoughtful and influential and having them see a different narrative that they haven't been exposed to before. And there are other folks maybe in the same group who this is nothing new to them. They're not shaking their heads. They're nodding their heads because this is their grandmas and their moms and their aunts and everyone else that has had generations of being in certain jobs with certain wages and experiencing these headwinds to progress. And oftentimes I felt like when we presented to groups like that, we didn't want to re-traumatize with the data of what those disparities look like. So I think there's just like a double-edged sword of that. Like, how do you meet people where they are? Make sure you're not re-traumatizing with data, and making sure that people who have never seen it before, that you want to kind of see the light about a tale of two cities, that they're receiving that information in a way that that allows them to act, allows them to be in the front part of their brain thinking about the information. So that's been a challenge along the way. We've made a ton of mistakes along the way, but that's a call out for other people as they do this work.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a rather tactical question. So I'm jumping from the strategy to operations to tactics because you provide some really rich information. And I know you have made reference to the Family Independence Initiative, who changed their name, and was it Up Together, I believe?
Up Together.
Up Together. And so my curiosity, I wanted to ask the question, what type of skills development training is necessary for the target population that you're focused on? What did you learn about the specific skill development training? And also, how are you able to build trust with that population, if you don't mind me asking?
Absolutely. So I think what is really important to point out about this situation is that we allow families and individuals to set their own goals and then not ask them to return back to us to get the skills that they need to make their goals happen. Actually a network or a platform, for lack of better words, where they're allowed to come together within their own community to see who has the thing that I need. How can I work with people who are around me to get to where I'm going? So that organic trust within the community was already there. It's really, and I almost sometimes resent when we say we give people voice, right? They already have their own voices. We're just kind of getting out of the way and allowing that space to happen. So, and then this was all during, of course, the time of COVID, right? So we were just creating and allowing spaces for people to physically gather, a platform where people could share their goals. Think of a Facebook sort of like virtual platform where you can share our goals, or you can even trade resources. So if we're both trying to go to school at night, hey, let's rotate. I watch your kids during this day, you watch my kids during this day, right? Really bringing back that sense of community. So it wasn't that we're trying, it's really rethinking how we have thought of philanthropy and how we think of people in poverty. We weren't trying to give them any skills, so to say. We were allowing them to set their own goals and allowing them to work with their own neighbors and people within their community that they already knew were there. And then there was really trusted relationships between the folks who work at Up Together. So GCF can certainly not take all the credit for this. Where they're actually placed in the community. They show up at these meetings. They kind of just give people calls. They check in. They say, hey, what do you need? What else? Oh, I'm sorry, there's some sort of emergency alert.
I think
what
it's
else?
Rashida, and it's all of us, and we say there's no philanthropic emergencies. Apparently, there is a test emergency coming up of our phones right now. So
I apologize. I have to say the Up Together staff was really wonderful in showing up as a community ally almost. So not always there to just educate and teach, although she was a resource for that. But sometimes showing up to those community meetings, the gatherings, when folks actually convene themselves together and willing to be quiet and just listen a little bit. That was a big part of starting the trust. It's not always showing up as the expert in the room, like, let me teach you the things that you were missing, but really listening and taking a very asset-based approach. Like, you've already got the skills that you need. And that is the response that I've heard from the families who are participating. That really helped them understand, like, it's okay to reach back out to this source and ask questions and get that help, because they also see me as the expert in my own life, and they're willing to listen to me as well.
Thank you. Systems change certainly requires advocacy at times, policy changes, and I know you had made reference to both policy and advocacy, and several, or I would say a good number of community foundations don't necessarily identify with their ability to advocate or to play a role as it pertains to policy. Can you explain how it shows up in your work, how you're able to advance policy, and if there are advocacy opportunities that you can inform the field that you can engage in to drive economic mobility? What does that look like from your perspective?
I'm going to turn over most of this question to Megan and Denisha, but I have to say I've spent my career in not-for-profit work. I think there was this myth that as a not-for-profit organization or as a philanthropic funder, you are not allowed to engage in advocacy efforts. I don't know where I got that myth from, but it was in my mind that, oh, that's terribly out of. And so it has been very actually refreshing to see truly that is not true at all. Lean into the work, be an ally, talk to your local representatives, and that is a part of the change and the impact that you're making in the community. But I just want to say that and name that, that myth is out there, and I will truly turn it over to Megan and Denisha that have deep expertise in our policy and advocacy work.
Well, I have to start with a thank you to CF Leads, actually, because by going through the EMON cohort, we decided to create a policy and advocacy position here, which I hold. And I think that was so important, that grant making is vitally important, right? And we're not going to grant our way out of poverty and racism. It takes more than that. You know, we need to change policies that have been in place for a long time to address those inequities. So we've started to do that. So let me give you one example of a policy change, and then I'll tell you about all this stuff outside of a numbered bill that you can do, right, to influence the issues we care about. So one piece of policy that we were really involved in, actually our women's fund here, was in the city of Cincinnati. We had done a lot of pay equity research, right? Going back to that research. And all that research, of course, that pay inequity, the gender pay inequity, is alive and well in Cincinnati, as it is in most communities. And we kept hearing one of the solutions to start to rectify this is make sure people are not asked their salary history when they're applying for a job. So everyone has a range in mind when they hire a position. Say I'm going to pay $50,000 to $60,000 for a certain position. But Anne comes in as an applicant, and I say, Anne, what are you making at your current job? And she says, $32,000 a year. And I say, I am so happy. We're going to offer you $38,000 a year to come to work for us, which is a huge raise for her, right? But nowhere near where we had in mind for that range of that job. So we know specifically when candidates are asked for their salary history, it anchors them to a previous amount. And we know women and people of color, and specifically women of color, have had a lower amount throughout the year. And it's very, the data proves that time and time again. So by specifically removing that question, we can allow them to shed that historic pay inequity. So we went to City Council with this research. We worked with a City Council member back in 2019. And we became the first city in the Midwest to outlaw this question being asked from employers in Cincinnati. And so this is a systems level intervention that helps with economic mobility, race, gender equity, et cetera. So, you know, that is lobbying. That is very specific, has a bill number attached to it. That is lobbying. I would say most of what we do, Denisha and I and others here at the Women's Fund, we are aggressively educating. We are telling them what policies and practices they could have in the city that would enable a more equitable and accessible government. We are benchmarking what other cities are doing because they don't have a lot of bandwidth. They don't have huge staffs at City Council or in our county. So by us putting our time into benchmarking what is working in other cities, we can help them along. Because we know when our city has more equitable policies and a more accessible, inclusive government, that really gets to our outcomes that we want to see across our city. So we do a lot of benchmarking, a lot of research, a lot of individual meetings with council members about what they can do. And every once in a while, yes, we are advocating for a specific bill with a number on it. We have also made a grant to our city for them to become members of GARE, the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. So that's a way we used our grant making to influence our government operations to make it more equitable. You got me on my soapbox. I could go on forever about policy change. It's my love language, but I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a few minutes, so I guess I have time for one more question. And I wanted to circle back around to the use of data. And the next question I have for you is, how do you measure the impact of your programs or initiatives and assess the effectiveness of data-driven approaches?
I'm going to start us off, and I think it a lot is what we're a new tool. And I want to name that it's new because we don't know if we have it exactly right yet. is really looking at those common impact measures from our not-for-profits and really looking at their outcomes. So really stop telling me it's more like quality over quantity, right? Stop telling me about the number of folks you served and tell me, has it really truly moved their income, their job attainment, their ability to access the needs that they access, whatever those needs are, monetary or otherwise, for starting a business, right? We really tried to look at how is this playing out in the actual economy rather than internally saying, oh, we've served X number of people. And again, in the spirit of being trust-based, we never wanted to dictate to an organization, well, you must tell us about increased income earnings of the participants. That's not what we're exactly looking for. But we are looking across all of our organizations that we find are like, what are the common sort of big tickers that everybody's measuring? And we culminate that together. What does that look like? Are we really making a difference? So that's how we've also really leaned into this way of how are we measuring success and holding ourselves accountable. But beyond that, leaning into actually what's happening out in the community. We don't want to be so heads down in our own data and our own reports that we're not assessing, and Megan named some of the sources early on in the conversation. Actual impact. Sorry, I'm having so many noise things happen, but we're not actually looking at the state of our community. So looking at the annual, we talk about this stat all the time here. Almost half of women in our community make less than Black women, working Black women in our region make less than $15 an hour. We are going to relook at this data point again and again and see if we're moving that needle. And ideally, it's going to be less and less and less. We're talking about assessing it every 5 years. I'm leaning in with other data sources that look beyond just our community foundation, but throughout the region, and making sure that we are looking to see what's happening and taking a temperature gauge in the community, as well as those organizations that we are funding and working closely with along these issues.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have just 3 minutes remaining, and I wanted to just ask a question. And hopefully we can do this in 30 seconds or less. I'm gonna ask each of you. If you had to define the top level reasons why data is important, what would that be? So just very quickly, why data?
To me, Leonard, is it helps you focus your strategies.
It helps you focus your strategies. Absolutely. And it's critically important to have strategies that are informed by data as opposed to shooting pasta, they say, on the wall and hoping it sticks.
And we say it all the time here at Greater Cincinnati Foundation, really to the credit of our new CEO, but data as a flashlight. How can you know where you're going or what you're targeting if you can't see what the issues are in the first place? So using data as a flashlight.
Data as a flashlight.
I'll say data helps move the needle, but it's not only quantitative data, you also need qualitative data as well. You need that balance.
Qualitative and quantitative data. Absolutely. And I think qualitative data is an area that is underutilized oftentimes as it pertains to strategies and being able to move the needle as it relates to various outcomes. So thank you.
Leonard, I would say when we hear the same themes in our qualitative data that match up to numbers in our quantitative data, we're really able to triage where to start, because these issues are so complex and so entrenched that you need to start somewhere to start making a difference. So I think data helps us triage.
Absolutely. So we are at time, and I just want to thank you, Megan. Thank you, Denisha. Thank you, Rashida. Thank you, Ann. Very rich conversation, very useful information for the field. Thank you for being trailblazers and pioneers in your respective in the community foundation field. And I'm very thankful to serve as a partner in this work. So thank you for your time. I'm pretty sure the audience is very grateful for this webinar, and thank you for supporting the work of CF Leads. So be well, everyone.
I think
Thanks,
also thank you, Leonard, and thank you to CF Leads. You've been hugely instrumental in helping us get here.
Right. That's right. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
All right,
Thanks all.
Bye. Thank you.